guys, and welcome to Betwixt the Books. I know this isn't the review that we said we would be doing next, but it is taking me longer to read Stamped from the beginning, and we both read this book, so we are going to do a review of that today. And that is The Cruel Prince by Holly Black. Gretchen, if you recall last week, did try a chapter tag, and that was the one that she chose that she liked reading the most, and I said that I would read it with her to help keep her motivated, since she has been struggling to read YA fantasy, and since it is also on our joint book review challenge list, we might as well do it now and read that one. So yeah, we're both going to be talking about that today. If you haven't read The Cruel Prince, which if you haven't and you read YA fantasy, I don't know what you're doing, you're under a rock, because that's like one of the biggest ones out there right now. I'll give you a little bit of an idea of what it's about. Takes place in Fairy, which is the place where like Celtic fairy live, the Seelie and Unseelie courts. Think elves more so than like pixies, fairies with wings, not Disney fairies, like the fairy of lore. They're cruel and magical and steal away children. So the protagonist is actually a human girl who was taken to Fairy as a young child. There's like plot points around why that happened, but she's been living there. She is now at the point in her life where she's trying to figure out how she's going to survive in Fairy and what her place is in Fairy, because most humans are usually servants, and she's been raised among the nobility or the actual fairies themselves. And for her, that means that she's going to try and be as ruthless and bloodthirsty as possible in order to find power in Fairy that way.
So, like I said, when I did the try a chapter tag, I found the opening of this just so interesting. And the reason is that because Jude, the main character, is human, like Michaela said. She does have an older sister named Vivi, who is half fairy, half human, and Jude also has a twin sister named Taryn, who is also human. And I feel like in a lot of stories, it would be the half fairy, half human daughter of the fairy who comes in and slaughters their human parents who would end up being the protagonist, but it's not. It's Jude, who goes to live in Fairy despite not being one, and then being raised in a weird way and trying to figure out what her life is going to be. And like Michaela said, she's totally ruthless and loves to swing a sword and wants to be a knight. And if you know anything about me and the fantasy that I love me a ruthless assassin knight main character. So for me, this was set up to be really interesting and really awesome. My overall review of this one was somewhere between 4 and 4.25 stars, since Storygraph is amazing and you can do decimal points. Because I felt like this book carried what I wanted it to be. There has some issues, which we'll talk about, but it was just, it had this promise of Jude as a main character, and I feel like in this book it carried that through. However, while we are only reviewing the first book in the series today, after I read this book in one sitting, I then proceeded to read The Wicked King and The Queen of Nothing, 3 books in 3 days. So unfortunately, my opinion of this book now, which I rated highly, is a little bit colored by those two, which have bigger issues, which I will cover later in a series review. But we're going to focus on this, the one that gave me joy, and I rated 4.25 stars because it carried off its promise of making Jude a badass who just wants to rule the world.
For me, I rated this book 3.75 stars on the Storygraph. Again, thank you, Storygraph, for letting us do decimal points. I think both of us would have rated it 4 stars if it was Goodreads, because it was about the same. Gretchen liked it a little bit more than I did, but she's also more inclined to like this kind of thing than I am. So that sort of makes sense. Basically, we're rating it about the same. I think I took issue with a couple of plot points a little bit more than she did. But other than that, I agree. The premise of this is interesting. I like the idea of having a normal protagonist struggling against superhuman combatants and things like that. I really like the way that you have to work around and figure that out when you are the underdog and not like the chosen one, the one with the magic. I liked the general plot of this one where she's training and learning her craft as well. While she has some training and background in it, she's also gaining more skills throughout it and using her cunning a lot more than like a superpowered person may have to. But like she said, there were some issues with it, and we'll go into those in a second. But yeah, so yeah, like a 4-star, 3.75 for me.
So before we get into issue discussion, I just want to say that, and this becomes important too for my series review later, that the plot and pacing of this one, while fairly predictable, I found really good. And the plot, like I said, was predictable. Michaela texted me halfway through because I'd already finished it, and she was like, I think this is what's gonna happen. And I was like, you are correct. And I can't say that there was too much that surprised me, except for something that happens at the ending, which to me was one of the reasons that I was so excited to read Wicked King, and I literally just like had to read it like the next day all in one sitting, because I was like, oh, this went further than I expected and set up something super cool. And like I said, I read 3 books in 3 days. I have been struggling to read, and I do work full time, by the way. It's not that these are particularly thick books, but they were worth it for me, all 3 of them, despite my issues, to just sit down and bust them out. So if you are looking for a trilogy of fantasy books that is not 500 pages a piece, this is for you. It also contributes to some of its issues. Look forward to my series review. But this one is good. This is nice. Good job.
Okay. I'm going to talk about the thing that bothered me the most. And part of this is because this is a YA book, right? So that the intended audience to this are preteens, teens, young adults, you know, the YA audience. Obviously adults read it. We're adults, we're reading it. There's plenty of adults that read it and enjoy it. But because the intended audience of this are younger, I take perhaps a little bit more critique in romance than I would for an adult book where there's an adult who can make their own decisions and think critically. Teens sometimes don't have that ability, and Gretchen and I have both talked about how we've gone back and looked at books that we thought were hot or sexy and gone, ooh, that's problematic. And that happens a little bit in this one, where I was like, ooh, the relationships in this are not good representation of relationships and should not be pined over. These boys are not good representations of what a boy should be. One of them is in a relationship with her, fully intending to not stay in a relationship with her, just trying to have his own fun. That's obviously not great when one person is only in the relationship to sort of cause trouble and to harm the other one. Obviously that's not good. And the other one is not in a relationship with her, but likes her and treats her poorly because of that. Which to me is one of the worst tropes. So boys will be boys. Oh, if boys like you, they're mean to you, because that leads into the possibility of being in an abusive relationship. Either one of these are abusive relationships. Being in an abusive relationship where you let somebody be mean to you because it means that they like you, or you're in a relationship with someone who seems nice but they're not nice, and they're just doing it to control you because they can. They have that ability. They want to see what you'll do. It's a narcissistic abuse. And just general physical abuse, emotional abuse. It's not good. I don't like that. I'm not a fan. I don't think that those are good representations of relationships, and I don't think either of them are ones that we're supposed to be rooting for, which is what the book tries to do.
So to follow up on that, I think I took slightly less issue with the first relationship that Michaela mentioned at first. This is key, because at one point Jude actually says to Locke, who is the boy, that they're just kind of like, they're playing pretend is actually what they say. So for me, I was like, oh, well, they're both in this relationship and it's clear that it's not serious, because the book is clearly setting Jude up with Carden, who was the second boy that Michaela mentioned, who is just mean to her because he likes her, which I agree, not great. I hate it. Please make it stop. If someone treats you poorly, if a boy throws dirt in your eye on the playground, it doesn't mean he likes you. It means that he threw dirt in your eye and should be avoided. Stop. So, no, I didn't like that either. part of why I didn't like that was also why I liked what happens at the ending, which I'm not going to spoil, but I was like, oh, go, Jude, go. But anyway, let's return to Locke for a second, because this issue where I said I didn't mind it as much at first, totally negated later on in the book, where it got even squickier. And this is the point where I say I am going to spoil something in that first book. So I am going to raise my hand and I'm going to say the spoiler, and then when I lower my hand, the spoiler will be over. What I will say up front is that the thing with Locke and Carton and Jude is already a love triangle, and then they kind of make it a weird love quadrangle, but not really, two smushed together triangles, and things get weird. And they pass it off as just, well, this is just fairies, you know, fairies will be fairies, boys will be boys, but it just ended up being really weird. So again, spoiler hand. So Jude and Locke are doing their thing, and come to find out the entire time that Locke has also been doing his thing with Jude's twin sister, Taryn. And Taryn loves Locke to the point that she wants to marry Locke. Marry Locke. Jude has no idea that Taryn is also hooking up with Locke, but Taryn does know that Jude is hooking up with Locke. But Locke has convinced her that it's some kind of like fairy game. And if Taryn can keep her mouth shut and just let it go all along, that she'll prove that she's more fairy-like and be the one that Locke chooses in the end. And this is slightly made better by the fact that at the end, Jude is mostly mad at Taryn and not Locke, because she's like, yeah, Locke is a douche, but Taryn is my twin sister, and what? And I appreciate that, but I was just like, Taryn also really wants to try to fit in, but going this far seemed kind of far outside of her character, and it just felt gross. And just like, especially, again, sorry, in later books we're supposed to sympathize with Taryn again, and I'm like, she's not forgiven. She's not forgiven for this. It's just gross. I'm not into it. Duh. I think that's all I have to say.
Yeah, I agree with her thoughts on that. And I'll say that the book tries to place the blame in a different place in order to mitigate that. And I think both of us went, that's not where the blame goes. That's not who should, we're playing the blame game here. That's not the problem person. We all know that's not the problem person in this relationship. The only thing that I'm going to add, and I'm going to try and do it non-spoilery, people who have read the book will know what I mean by this, but there is a point in the book where something happens, and my reaction was, no, 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 you are not the Princess Bride. You do not get to do this. This is the Princess Bride. It's like the exact situation from the princess. You're just you pick it up and you put it in. No, no, no. That's just the Princess Bride. What are you doing? That's not how that works. And that made me angry, and that's why it went from 4 stars to 3.75 stars. And I just wanted to add that like I maybe got too angry for that, but that was my reaction to that. And there's gonna be kids who read that and then go see the Princess Bride and be like, they took the thing from the Cruel Prince. No, no, no. No, no, no. You can't do this. What are you doing? So, yeah, that's my only other thing. It made me probably unreasonably angry, but this book is not the Princess Bride. It does not get to take the bits from the Princess Bride.
I didn't have this issue. I recognized it as a thing, but I didn't have this issue. So I feel like throughout this entire review, Michaela and I have just kind of been pounding away at this book. And that's because, of course, it's easier to talk about what you disliked or what you took issue with and what you did like, which is, again, for me, the character of Jude. It is just, this book for me set up so much potential and so much promise for this story, as long as you just said, okay, this is Jude's story and she has power grabbing that she wants to do, and even though there are these relationships, Jude never really loses focus on her desire to acquire a place and power in fairy. So that's why I really like this book. That's why I felt like it set up a really interesting premise, and I zoomed through the rest of this series. So while it has its issues, I also use this book for my Pop Sugar Challenge as the book everyone seems to have read but you, because I feel like everyone has seemed to have read this entire series but me as a YA fantasy reader, and a lot of people seem to really like it. And I did really like this book, despite its issues. And then I read the rest of them. That will possibly be an unpopular opinion series review coming soon. But, you know, you might really like them. So if you've already read them, which is far more likely than you watching this review to see if you should read them, let us know what you thought. We are just two people with two individual opinions, and everyone is welcome to their own. So let us know down in the comments, and look forward to my eventual series review. All right, gonna head out. Thanks, guys. Bye.